Welcome everyone. This may be Miscellaneous Lecture 7 or it may be Lecture 8. I apologise in advance if there's any confusion over this. Someone found an old lecture I gave several years ago which appeared on YouTube about the difference between monetarism and Keynesianism. When I used to teach this, I used to stand on one side of the room and explain why Keynesians were correct. And everyone would then believe me. I'd then go to the other side of the room and explain why monetarists were correct, and everyone would believe me. And then I said, you can't believe both of these things because one, if it is right, the other is wrong, or they're both wrong. They cannot both be right, what I've just told you. And someone has found this and it sort of crept into the miscellaneous group. So I'm not sure whether this will be, in the end, Miscellaneous Lecture 7 or Miscellaneous Lecture 8, but it's called "Is Crypto the New Gold Standard?" Now, I don't know a great deal about cryptocurrencies. I know a little bit about cryptocurrencies, and I've got a lot of friends who are interested in crypto, and indeed a few of them trade crypto, and they ask me questions about this, and I keep saying no, it will never take off. And of course this has been going on for a long time, so they keep coming back and saying, look, you didn't get it right, did you? So I need to explain all the things that will make crypto a possible solution, and then I'll explain why it won't be. So let's make a start on this. You see, the value of crypto only really exists if you do put currency with it. So you've got to talk about cryptocurrency. And that's all that gives it value, is the anticipation that one day the world will accept a cryptocurrency to replace all of the individual currencies that there are around the world. And if they're right, of course, then the value of crypto will be quite high. If they're wrong, then the value of crypto will go all the way down to almost nothing. Now, there are great similarities between gold, which was a very successful source of money, and cryptos. So I shall go through this explanation. I will actually start by explaining what the gold standard is, because not many people understand it. Then the similarities with crypto, and then what I think is a real flaw in the cryptocurrency, which will stop it being anything other than something that has value because people expect something that will happen that I don't think will happen. The main difference between gold and crypto is that gold actually has value in exchange, as a crypto would have to be used in exchange to have value. And gold also has value in use, and crypto doesn't. Now, what I mean by that is that if gold wasn't used as money, as it isn't, you'd use it to make jewellery because people like gold, and my wife and I wear gold rings, and my wife wears quite a lot of gold jewellery. I don't wear any other than the ring, but gold has value in use. It also had value in exchange. Cryptos have potential value in exchange, but they don't have any value in use. And this is a significant difference. As I go through this, you may begin to understand the potential problems that there are as we move forward. There are only really two main reasons for having cryptocurrencies. That's to avoid regulations, particularly national regulations that get in the way and impede money flows around the world, and the possibility of avoiding taxation as well. All of these things impede money flows, and cryptos overcome that problem because they are not tied to any one country. Also, you want the cryptocurrency to create monetary and price stability. And this is the big debate, if you like. A lot of the fans of crypto say exactly that. It's coming. It will produce this monetary and price stability. This, of course, is the area where I have my doubts. Now, take you back a little bit, because the whole thing about currency is you want it to be stable. So you don't want it to create inflations or deflations. Ideally, your currency wants to create a stability of average prices. It doesn't mind if individual prices go up and down, that's changes in relative prices, but it doesn't want to destabilize by causing inflations and deflations. And if you actually look at a chart of UK inflations, which is from 1860 to 2015, you'll see that when we were on the gold standard, you get this period of time here where inflations, deflations took place. The worst sort of +5, -5%, but relatively stable and going backwards as well. Gold has created a relative stability in terms of prices. If you go to when we leave the gold standard, 1914, beginning of the First World War, you can see that things are not quite so stable during this period of time. So off the gold standard, and you have a lot of instability. Now there is a period here where you've got relative stability, although it's all inflation, there's no deflations in this period. And that was actually a period that we were on what was called the gold exchange standard, which meant that gold was the basis, if you like, of the monetary system. And then we went off this early 1970s, and you can see what happened as soon as we were off gold. Although there's this little bit at the end here, particularly in the UK where the Bank of England became independent. And there is actually one thing a central bank can do, and that is create price stability. The Bank of England showed it for a short period of time, but then of course if we carry on past here, we're going to see problems in the not too distant future. So historically, you've got a gold standard which creates price stability, and being off of a gold standard, you can see there's plenty of price instability. Now I said there are similarities between cryptocurrencies and the gold standard in as much as there is potential to create stability, but, and we'll deal with the but in a moment. So we had this stability all the time we were on a gold standard, and relative stability when we were on the gold exchange standard, and that's through that period of time. Gold was an international currency, so it wasn't really a national currency. Obviously national currencies were backed by gold, but the gold itself would shift between countries and settle debts, if you like, between countries. Now Bitcoin, whether it tried or whether it did, actually mirrored the development of the gold standard. And that's again an interesting and significant point. Before I actually continue on the road, if you like, to a cryptocurrency, we do need to understand clearly what the gold standard is. And I want to go even back further than that and explain to you what money is, because money is the currency that we're talking about. Money isn't well understood, but it did develop without anyone actually managing anything or doing anything. And if we understand that, we'll understand what's good about cryptos and then what isn't so good about cryptos. So let's just start with what is money. There's a lovely definition, I think, of money. A fellow called Francis Amasa Walker, who lived between 1848 and 1897, he said this about money, which I always like to use as my definition. I'll hold it here just for the moment, because you can always freeze the frame if you want to digest it in more detail. But he said money, it's that which passes freely from hand to hand in full payment for goods in final discharge of indebtedness, being accepted equally without reference to the character or credit of the person tendering it, and without the intention on the part of the person receiving it to consume, enjoy or otherwise use it, than by passing it on sooner or later in exchange. That's what money is. Brilliant definition. It passes freely from person to person, maybe just as digits, so it doesn't necessarily have to be a physical thing. It's accepted by people in settlement of debt, and the people who receive it don't enjoy it or consume it or do anything with it other than pass it on to somebody else. That's what money is. Now, money actually doesn't do a great deal of good. It creates a stable system within which trade can take place. And if you can keep money growing at exactly the required rate, then that's the best you could expect from money. You get too much of it or too little of it, and you've got problems. You know, money isn't this wonderful thing that can solve all of our problems, that can create economic growth, that can create employment, and all the things that various Keynesian and modern monetary theorist ideas suggest. So it doesn't do much good outside, it's just there to facilitate trade. In fact, it damages the economy if you get ever increasing amounts of money or even less amounts of money. Either way the imbalances go, inflations or deflations create problems for an economy. Neither of them are good for economies, although a very, very low rate of inflation is actually better than a very, very low rate of deflation. So that's one of the reasons why central banks have gradually drifted towards trying to agree a target for inflation of 2%. It just takes you a little bit away from naught. Naught would be best, but naught risks deflation, and deflation changes people's perceptions much more quickly than does inflation. So what you want of money is you want a sufficient amount of money in the economy to maintain stable prices. And then that is a necessary condition, but not a sufficient condition for an economy to function efficiently. Now, the functions of money, might as well remind you straight away what they are so that you know what we're dealing with if we're talking about the development of cryptocurrency as money. Money must be a medium of multilateral exchange. And by multilateral exchange, we don't mean bilateral exchange. Bilateral exchange occurs under a barter system where you trade one good for another good. Multilateral exchange is where you sell one thing, take a medium of exchange and use it to buy all manner of other things. It's a medium of multilateral, not bilateral, exchange. You also want money to be your unit of account. You want to be able to add up things and compare things, different prices for different goods, so it's got to be a unit of account. You want your money, while you're holding it as money, to be a store of wealth. You don't want it to suddenly lose all its value because there was no point ever in holding money if that's the case. So you want it to be a store of wealth, and you want it to be what's called in the textbooks a standard of deferred payment. And all that means is if I agree today to pay someone something in 2 weeks' time or a month's time when they deliver a product to me, I want the money that I'm going to pay to have the same value in 2 weeks' time and a month's time as it has now. So those four characteristics, or those four functions, rather than characteristics, four functions of money are what you want of money. Now this developed over time quite naturally, and if I take you all the way back very quickly, I can illustrate that point. If I take you all the way back to when we lived in caves and we were what is described as a hunter-gatherer society, and me, I'm the hunter. In my cave I go out and kill the animals and eat the food and skin them and use them as clothes and so on. But my next door neighbour in the next cave is a vegetarian. They're only a gatherer. They go out gathering fruit and vegetables in order to keep them alive. I'm basically, a meat and two veg man. So I could, because I do like my vegetables, but I'm too busy hunting animals to actually pick them, I could trade one of my animal skins for some vegetables from the cave next door. But I know my skin is actually worth more than the perishable vegetables that I currently require. So I'll go, yeah, okay, you can have my skin. I'll have those vegetables there. And look, you've got a lot of salt there. I'll take a lot of that salt from you as well, and the deal is done. Now, I don't want that salt. I currently don't require that salt, but I know everyone wants salt for one reason or another. So I know, as Walker said in his definition, that I can pass it on sooner or later in trade to somebody else. So I don't want the salt, not buying it because I want it. I'm just buying it to settle this debt for vegetables to my animal skin, and I'm going to hold on to this salt and in the future use it to buy other goods or services. So salt is then actually taking on the role of money. So early forms of money were things like salt, things like animal hides. In the southern seas, cowrie shells, which were very decorative, were used as money. In Newfoundland, in America, it was dried cod. In Virginia, it was tobacco. In the West Indies, it was sugar. All of these sorts of things were generally acceptable, and people would hold them not because they want them, but so they could use them to trade things in the future. These were the early forms of money. Now, what did you want of these early forms of money? You wanted them to be generally acceptable. Everyone you hoped would want salt or animal hides or dried cod or whatever it is you developed as your money. So it's got to be generally acceptable. It's got to be durable. So strawberries wouldn't be any good because they're perishable. So no point in strawberries ever being money. It needs to be divisible into smaller amounts. So salt does well there. You can have very small amounts of salts or aggregate them and get very large amounts of salt. Although you need to remember that if it gets wet, you might have a problem with salt, but you want it to be divisible. You want to be able to carry it around, which was probably a difficulty with dried cod, because if you had it in your wallet and put it in your pocket, things got a bit smelly. But you need it to be portable. So you need the quantities there to be relatively scarce, but not too scarce. And you want the quantity available for use as money to be fairly stable over long periods of time. Now, what gradually replaced those things was coins and silver and gold coins. And often this was where the monarchy nipped in, because as you know, the monarchy doesn't do a job that allows it to earn any money. So it's always quite keen if it can get money from in some form or other, taxes or something like that. And one of the things that the monarchs could do was to mint gold into coins, mint silver into coins, and do a bit of advertising as well. They could pop their picture on one side, which would help, and the coins would then be a definitive weight of silver or gold. At least until Henry VIII got hold of this, because Henry VIII, over a 4-year period, only 4 years, he reduced the amount of gold in his so-called gold coins to 1/7 of the original value, just over 4 years. Now, he obviously had a lot of overheads, Henry, 6 wives, so a lot of alimony to pay. In fact, he even had to start chopping their heads off to avoid paying them alimony. He had wars and religious wars to fight. And in fact, one thing that you will even notice in films these days, that when people are paying with coins, there's this thing about wanting to chew the coin, just bite the coin, because as Henry VIII debased coinage, which means he put base metal into the coins, they still looked as though they were gold coins, but they weren't. They were using less and less gold and more other metals which looked like gold and debased it. You could tell just by chewing them whether it was actually all gold or whether there were some different base metals in there. So what was he actually doing? He actually caused inflation, as you can imagine, because he'd increased the amount of coins in circulation dramatically by putting only 1/7 of the gold into each coin that originally was 100% gold. So gold probably it varies from different parts of the world, but was our real first money. And after all, this is the title of what we're looking at today, is the crypto going to become the new gold standard? So a little bit about how gold developed, because again, it wasn't managed, no government did it, it just sort of happened quite naturally, and this is how it happened in the UK. Specifically, quite a lot of Jews from various parts of Europe were not very happy where they lived and gravitated towards England, this country, and they lived in a particular part of London, the East End of London, and a lot of them were goldsmiths. Now that is, they made jewellery, and they made jewellery out of gold and other things, of course, but they were goldsmiths, so gold was their main form of jewellery. And this, you know, we're talking 1600s, 1700s, a long time ago. And at the same time, things were going on. Well, in 1640, Charles I, he actually raided the Royal Mint and stole all the gold to fight one of his wars. The English Civil War was 1642 to 1651. And during that period of time, the goldsmiths obviously found that their demand for decorative jewellery fell off a cliff because people were just out there having a civil war. But they actually had something which was quite useful, because they had to have safes, they had to have somewhere to keep the gold safe while they were doing their work. So during these unsettled times, these goldsmiths became depositories for gold. There was a general acceptance of gold and goldsmiths' receipts. Now, what I mean by that is that if you, a rich person, took some of your gold along to the goldsmiths and paid a little bit for them to look after your gold for you, they would give you a receipt. Now, that receipt gave you two options if you ever wanted to use that gold to buy something. If you wanted to use that gold to buy something, you could go to the goldsmiths, take the gold out, take it to the mint, get it minted into coins, pay for those products, whatever it was you bought with those coins. Or you could persuade the other person to accept the receipt for gold, you know, sign it and pass it over to somebody else and say, right, that was my gold, now I've bought this from you, it's your gold, and here is the receipt. So the piece of paper would pass from one person to another, just transferring the ownership of gold without ever taking the gold away from the goldsmiths. Now, goldsmiths, realising this, would, if you deposited gold with them, create different receipts. You know, a few £1 receipts, £5 receipts, £10 receipts, £50 receipts, just like today. And these receipts would be for the ownership of gold. And these receipts were used in trade. They were passed on time and time again. The ownership of the gold was transferred as people transferred products from the producers of those products to the consumers of those products. So goldsmiths' receipts in different denominations were soon used as money. Now, the initial effect of that was, you know, think of this circle just as the amount of money that was in the economy then. There was a bit in the middle, this sort of gold, that stayed with the goldsmith. And then there were lots of receipts for that gold. Ownership of that gold came round and round in the economy. But all of those receipts that were going round in the economy were actually if you stopped the moving at any one point, every receipt was 100% backed by gold. That was the initial situation. Now, goldsmiths realised that people were happy to use their receipts and didn't actually want to go and see their gold. Of course, some people did, but basically the gold just stayed in the vaults weeks, months, years. And they decided, or not decided, the sort of market dictated that there was another business here for them, because they had lots of gold. There were people out there, often governments, who wanted to borrow gold, who were short of money, and they could make loans of this gold just temporarily to people, you know, for a month, a year. They could make loans, and the people that they loaned the gold to would again have the choice. They could take the gold out and bring it back in a year's time plus interest, or they could accept a goldsmith's note to say that they owned this gold that they were going to use, that they borrowed to buy goods and services. At this point, the number of notes that have been created by goldsmiths were the original notes for the gold owned and new notes created in loans. So these loans that were made had new notes attached to them. So we were in a situation now, as soon as the goldsmith becomes the early banker and starts lending out money and lending out gold, then you have more notes in circulation than you have gold. Doesn't matter. You've got to make sure that, we know some people want to come and see their gold or take it out. You've got to make sure you've always got enough there to satisfy everyday demand for gold. And as long as you do that, then there will be no problem. And it was a very useful system, of course, because what it did was expand the amount of money in the economy as the economy was expanding. And in the past, where you used to have to pay a goldsmith, one of the early bankers, to look after your money, he would like to attract more gold, and he might start offering you interest. Say, put your gold with me and I'll give you 2% a year, or whatever it is, because he knows he's going to lend it out for 5% or 6% or whatever it is. And you have to be careful, because you suddenly hit upon the idea that all I've got to do is create a loan and I'm going to earn a lot of money by doing that. But you could become too greedy. You could keep creating lots and lots of loans, and then suddenly people go for their gold, and unexpectedly heavy demand on one day, and of course the gold's not there because you've now created more paper receipts. And money looks like this now. Money is two concentric circles where there's gold in the middle and there's lots of paper receipts which are greater than the amount of gold that you have. So the early bankers created money, as banks do now, through making loans and creating more notes that could be spent. So we've now got a money situation where gold is the basis, so we're still on the gold standard, but there are now more notes in circulation than there is gold in the vaults. But as long as we don't know that, we have no problems, because who wants to use gold to make transactions when you can just use a bit of paper and transfer the ownership of gold, which it's not all there, but never mind, it's one of those things that requires confidence. Now, the main disadvantage of this unofficial gold standard, if you like, is the instability that's caused by people who discover more gold. And you look at the history of gold discoveries and you'll see them called gold rushes, and there's a reason for that, but you'll see them in Alaska, in California, in South Africa, in Australia, and all at different points in time, because gold buys you things. So gold is worth something. So someone who finds some gold, you know, imagine an old prospector going up in the hills of wherever he is and finding that there's some gold being washed down in the rivers. And so he starts to collect it. Now, if he kept quiet about it and didn't tell anybody, he could probably make himself very rich over lifetime. But, you know, he couldn't. Yee-haw, he runs into the town with his gold, gets drunk, tells everybody how rich he is, and then next morning they're all following out trying to find out where he goes. And all of a sudden there's a gold rush. People know where it is. So lots and lots of gold gets taken out at one point in time. Now that causes inflation. And it causes inflation because all of a sudden, without any increase in output or with a slow increase in output, you suddenly have a big increase in gold. Now at the time you get inflation, the one thing that doesn't go up in price is gold. It actually goes down in price because there's so much of it. And you exhaust the gold seams wherever you are in Alaska or California, and that's the end. There's then going to be years of no more gold. Now, during the years of no more gold being discovered, the price of gold then starts to rise. And the price of gold starts to rise as you get deflation. The products, they go down in price, because what's happened is that output of goods and services has been growing steadily, 5% a year. There's no more gold to finance this. So what happens is that less gold has to be used, which means prices fall. But like before, it's the opposite for gold. Gold now becomes more valuable as prices fall, and so it becomes more attractive for people to go out and look for more gold. And when they look for more gold and someone finds it somewhere else, can't keep quiet about it, then there's another rush and there's a sudden increase. So that's what all these ups and downs, you remember here, these ups and downs here were all to do with gold rushes and then a relative shortage of gold, gold rush, relative shortage of gold. So that's what's happening here. But even with these gold rushes, these ups and downs, you still had relative stability of prices if you compare them with any fiat system that we have ever had. Just compare the numbers. You know, you only have to look at a fiat system and compare it with this, and you go, yeah, fiat systems don't work particularly well, do they? Gold did work well, didn't it? So all of that really developed without government getting too involved until in the UK in 1844, Robert Peel passed the Bank Charter Act, which gave the Bank of England a virtual monopoly over the printing of notes, which were backed by gold. He allowed an excessive amount of fiduciary issue of £14 billion, obviously because governments also are short of money and need to access money in one way or another, same as they do now. So you still had a gold standard because every note promised to pay the bearer an amount of gold, and you also had the private banks were still able to create loans and create money. So you still have a system which allows the money supply to expand as we were then on what we would call an official gold standard, where all notes and currency and bankers' receipts were convertible into gold. You then get to World War I, and I won't bore you with all the details, but the whole thing about a war is that there are only really three ways of financing it. You can get a loan to finance it, you can raise taxes to finance it, or you can print loads of money. Printing loads of money is the easy thing to do, but if you print loads of money backed by gold, you've got a problem. The problem being that gold is not expanding. If notes expand, then it's likely that people will realise and take out their gold and find out that it's not there. So what you do is the government suspends the gold standard in order to fight its war. Suspending the gold standard was what brought that inflation, followed by that deflation, great instability, and the deflation itself occurred after the war, when the government tried to return to the pre-war gold standard, which meant they had to destroy lots of the paper money and cause a deflation to sort of match the inflation. Didn't quite make it. That was the inflation, that was the deflation that took place. So it was a very unstable period of time when you were off the gold standard. After the Second World War was when you introduced the gold exchange standard. The gold standard had been abolished in 1931. We'd had lots of problems. We'd had a war. But we had a conference at Bretton Woods where we set up the gold exchange standard. Now, the gold exchange standard meant that only people who officially held currencies, which were central banks, could get the gold. You and I couldn't. Unfortunately, they'd taken away that right. But here, if one country owed another country money, then they would transfer gold. And when they transferred gold, then you'd have to contract the number of notes in circulation, as you now had less gold backing your currency. So there were reflations and deflations within countries that would bring some realignment. And if we look again here, it's this period of time here, which is again relatively stable. It's inflationary, but it's relatively stable compared with when the gold exchange standard collapsed. Because like in the old days, goldsmiths might get carried away with creating too much money and not have enough gold to back it. So the United States of America did exactly that. It had wars of Korea, then Vietnam that it needed to finance. And the gold exchange standard collapsed in 1971, and full fiat currencies were born then. The full fiat currencies here, this period of time here, and again you can see a period of time when things were very unstable. So fiat currencies are exactly that. They are inherently unstable when you look at the price of money, the rate of interest, or the quantity of money. Both those two characteristics are very unstable. They need not be. Fiat currencies could be brilliant and very stable. But the temptation, as always, with anyone who gets anywhere near a printing press, is always to say, yeah, I can spend our way out of this problem. I can spend our way out of the pandemic. There's no problems at all with what governments can do as long as they can get their hands on money. But there's no evidence ever that governments have been able to maintain stability, and as we'll see in 2022, late 2021, they've already created the seeds of their own inflationary destruction by thinking that they can print as much money as they like and create as much money as they like. Now, because central banks are not managing currencies well, along comes cryptocurrencies, because they have the potential to be remarkably stable. And if you can't trust the dollar, the euro, sterling, you might start to say, right, we're going to trade in a currency that we can trust. And I suppose the first big hitter here was Bitcoin. And Bitcoin actually tried to mimic gold, because you used to dig gold up at, we had miners who went out there and got gold. And you also have to mine your Bitcoin. And you'll know that the miners of Bitcoin are very similar to the old prospectors for gold. And that creates some control over the supply of the Bitcoin. So you mine it like gold and the total supply is fixed. So there are great similarities between gold and Bitcoin. Now, I am going to suggest to you that it has one fatal flaw, Bitcoin, and you probably all need to listen to this and then go rushing out, because we don't want to see a sudden collapse in Bitcoin. It will collapse, but we don't want a sudden collapse of it, do we? Because Bitcoin has almost all the characteristics that would make it a sound money, except it's an asset whose value is unstable. Now that's the end of it, really. It will never become a currency because its value is unstable. And when people realise that it cannot maintain stability, it will lose all of its value because unlike gold, it has no value in use. It only has value in exchange, although I do sometimes suggest that in 20 years' time or 30 years' time, people will be wearing Bitcoin necklaces. I don't know if they're small enough to make a ring of them, because some of the minted Bitcoins look very nice, and it will be a great thing, wouldn't it, for a person to have a necklace with one Bitcoin on it and to go, do you like my necklace? You see that Bitcoin there? That used to be worth £45,000. It's a nice talking piece, isn't it? And I'm sure there is a market for jewellery and Bitcoin, but I doubt that will ever be the case. But I don't doubt that Bitcoin is going to lose all of its value when it's realised that it will never take up as an international and a worldwide currency, because it's not stable in terms of its value, and it's actually got a fixed amount. So its quantity is stable, it grows in a very stable way, but stick speculation on top of it and its prices are very unstable, bearing in mind that sort of just over 10 years ago, one Bitcoin would be less than £1 sterling. You know, now we're looking at £45,000 for one Bitcoin. It would be quite nice for someone with lots of Bitcoins to go out and finance student educations, wouldn't it? Here's your one Bitcoin, that will soon be worth £50,000 and pay off your student loan for 3 years. Just think what could have happened if you'd realised that 10 years ago. There are, of course, a lot more coins other than Bitcoins. There's Litecoin, Titcoin, a nice name. I like that one because I have blue tits in the garden, so I always think of that as a nice name for a coin. Stellar, Ethereum, selection of alternative coins. Now, lots of these things are doing exactly the same thing, and they're great fun for people to pass around and buy and sell each other. And of course, that's mainly what happens. Bitcoin, 99.9% of Bitcoin trade is in Bitcoin. It isn't Bitcoin being used to buy or sell anything else. It's just people betting on whether it will ever become a currency, and therefore buying and selling between each other. Now, there's just one aspect of cryptos that could work, and that's the architecture behind cryptos, which is the blockchain. Now, a blockchain, in my opinion, doesn't work if it just records how many Bitcoins you've got and the trade in Bitcoins, but it could work to be a sophisticated system of barter. That is, trading goods directly, or goods and services directly. Silly idea, just to make the point. If I'm a hairdresser and I need to have my car serviced and there's a local garage, I might come to an agreement that for 100 haircuts, I'll trade 10 services for my car. Now that can be put in a blockchain. That can be in there, and it can be a precise thing that could never be inflated away or deflated away. My 100 haircuts is worth 10 services of my car. And then just suppose that after my first service, I decide to go green and I trade my other 9 car services for a bike. So there's now a third party involved in this. A third party is holding the equivalent of 90 haircuts, and I've got their bike. So you can see multilateral trade taking place here, and you can see that the measurements are always in real things. So it is, as I said, a sophisticated barter system that you're looking at. And in a sophisticated barter system, you cannot have inflation or deflation. You've got stability straight away. inflation and deflation only exists in a system based upon money, not a system based upon barter, because what this barter system does is maintain the real value of everything. So you could never get a change in the average level of prices, because in a barter system every price that goes up is matched by an equal price that goes down, because it's measured in terms of the product itself. So if one apple buys 2 oranges and then one apple buys 4 oranges, the apple's gone up, the oranges have gone down by the same amount. You can never change the average. Relative prices can change, as we want in any system, but average prices can't change. And of course that's the problem with all currency systems, is inflation and deflation. So I don't know as much about cryptos as all of my colleagues, and particularly those people who trade cryptos. So I'm not suggesting to you that you're wrong and that I'm right, but I am suggesting to you that there is a real problem out there, and be wary, be warned, because I really cannot see Bitcoin ever becoming a currency, and as soon as it is realised, then all it will have is jewellery value, no other value at all. But I can see the architecture of blockchain. If central banks around the world carry on as they are now, creating more and more fiat money, and economies become unstable and inflation takes place. I mean, it was only in the 1970s, and look back and you'll see that we had inflation of 30%. Nearly a third of sterling was lost in 1 year. It's a little under 30%, but close enough. Once that sort of system gets out of control, people might then look to an alternative, and that's when these cryptocurrencies would come into their own. I'm not sure that that will happen, because these days central banks know enough to just let inflation reach a number that they can explain and they can control and they can manage. So I think that central banks will get this under control, or central banks will create their own digital currency. They'll go, let's go cashless. The currency is no longer legal tender. The only thing that's legal tender is these digits that I've put onto this balance sheet as a government, and you can own as many of those digits as you like. Your income will be paid out in digits, and you can use your tap and go card, and we can run a system in that way. So probably at the end of the day, if it ever looks as though cryptocurrencies will take off, the central bank and the government will be in there and take over. And we wait to see whether that will happen. So I haven't gone in here to anything that is complicated about cryptos, and you who understand cryptos better than I can look at all of these complications. But what I have suggested to you is that the gold standard created a lot of stability. Bitcoin as a crypto has a very similar system to the gold standard, but one fatal flaw. The fatal flaw is that Bitcoin has no inherent value. It has no value in use. And when we went off the gold standard, of course, gold didn't just go down to having no value at all, because it was used for other things. And even now, you'll see gold has not only the price which would allow it to be used to produce other things, but it also has a speculative premium on it, because people out there who don't quite understand cryptos are going, yeah, I'm worried about will they be able to maintain the value of the dollar? Will they be able to maintain the value of the euro and sterling? Just look at all of the new money that they're created. I better get into something real, so I'm going to get into gold, or I'm going to buy myself a few more houses, or what. I need to get out of money. And that get out of money characteristic is the opening, if you like, for cryptos to come in and take over the system, but I suspect it will be governments and central banks who will get that under control, and the cashless society and tap and go cards will allow them to do that. So enjoy your ride with the cryptos, but please be warned that one day their value will go down very rapidly and very quickly. So in and out, in and out. Don't bet your pension on a cryptocurrency. I don't know what you bet your pension on these days, but I wouldn't bet it on a cryptocurrency. I can say more about this at a later date in another lecture, but I hope that's given you something that you can go out and argue with each other and think carefully about this system, because I don't want people to get stung by what is happening and what is going to happen. So I hope you've enjoyed it, and I'll be back with another lecture soon, where I'll try and apply some economics to what's going on in the world today and see if we can make some sense of it. Thank you.